Good afternoon. The Department of Corrections also uses statistics and data to manage our everyday operations. We use it to search for cell phones. We use it to determine how to search for weapons. So the same type of policing that's done, we use internally in the Department of Correction. But today, something a little bit more mundane, but in some ways a lot more difficult. How do you deal with the reentry of inmates? How do you use evidence-based practicing to have inmates reenter society? Do we do it? There's the myth that you come into the Department of Correction and you take up space for a few years and you go back to society until you come back to us within a couple of months. In a lot of ways that may be true, in a lot of ways that's not true. And I want to talk about what's not true today. Evidence-based practices, as you talked about, I'm sure, earlier today, rely on evaluation of outcome rather than just anecdotes and opinion. It's based a lot on statistics and data. In the areas of reentry within our department, there are 4 primary areas that we would deal with. And that's our in-house transitional services, our in-house drug treatment programs, our education programs, and our community services or halfway houses. These are the ways that inmates tend to be educated and prepared to go back out into society. In terms of our drug treatment programs, all of our in-house drug treatment programs are evidence-based programs. We have more than 1,376 of our beds are dedicated strictly to the therapeutic community program. It's a drug treatment program, and that is strictly an evidence-based program. Each of these programs up here are evidence-based. And by evidence-based, which means they have been tested and tried. SAMHSA has certified a number of our programs. ACA has certified a number of our programs. These are the programs that we tend to work with. Jumping to my last slide, the issue is going to become, do you have the right data to say where you should be investing your money? Should you be investing more money into therapeutic community and less money in living in balance? Or should you be doing the opposite? That is a project that my chief of staff is working on with the parole board, with the police, and with Rutgers University, is to develop a data mart. Because if the community courts work, I don't see the inmate. The community courts are able to, the police in conjunction with the community courts are able to deal with the problem right at the local level. And if they deal with it at the local level, your more violent prisoners will be at the state level. So you hear a lot of talk in the community about diversionary programs. And we should move inmates back into the community, but if the real argument is that the inmate should be diverted back to the community, then the real answer is that inmate should have been treated differently before they came to the Department of Correction. So a lot of our research has to be on how we interact with the police department, how we interact with parole, how we interact with the community. And your data mart will collect that data, and it'll allow one area for all of the criminal justice agencies to begin pulling and doing analysis. Does a Cage Your Rage program in conjunction with therapeutic community render a good outcome? Or do we have to go further into a parole setting and leave links to the inmate for a longer period of time in parole and a shorter period of time in correction? What's the right mix? What works? And that's the data that we're hoping to get out of the data mart, which should become operational in the next year or so. In terms of our transitional services programs, those are more for the programs that deal with the inmate that is not eligible for one reason or another to go out to our community programs. So you have things like Cage Your Age. It's a 12-week program. It's a cognitive behavioral program. It's endorsed by NIC. And its effort is to make the offender think differently about their actions. So again, the question is, what's your recidivism rate for that program? If an inmate goes through that program, is his or her recidivism rate lower than if they did not? And this is the data, again, that we'll hope to get out of Data Mart. Right now, we're using it as an evidence-based program that has been certified by the industry as workable. But if someone said to me, what's your return on that investment? Right now, I wouldn't be able to tell you that. In the future, we hope to be able to do that. Cage Your Age, again, an ACA-endorsed program, American Correctional Association endorsed program, and obviously it's an anger management program. The one program in our transitional services that is not yet a evidence-based certified program is our STARS program. And that program is dedicated primarily to inmates that are going to go back to society from the Department of Correction. They're not going to go through a halfway house. They may spend some time on parole, but they're going to be back out in the community from us. Here what we try to do is over a 13-week period, twice a week, 2 hours per session, we take the inmate and we deal with each of the transitional issues they're going to have to face once they leave prison. Everything from as simple as identification. You need a birth certificate, you need a social security card, you need a driver's ID card in order to go out to the workplace. You don't want an inmate, or former inmate at that point, going out to the workplace using his New Jersey DOC as ID. It just doesn't work when you're looking for a job. We do interview practicing with them. How do you present yourself at an interview? What do you need at an interview? What should your expectations be at that interview? So these are the types of things that we will deal with. Your housing. When you leave here, where are you going? Do you know which relative you're going to move in with? Have you discussed that with that relative? If possible, can we get that link in the community with the relative so that the social workers can now start working with the family as well as parole. Every inmate that comes into our system now has a contract with parole. So they know that 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, at my earliest parole date, this is what the board is going to expect that I have done. I've taken this program, I have my GED, I've successfully completed Cage Your Age. If I've not, the parole board is going to be asking why. But the parole staff doesn't wait 4 or 5 years to see if that's been completed. They do regular updates with each inmate throughout the process. I believe it's an annual review with each inmate throughout the process. So STARS is another program that we're hoping in the short future we will be able to have certified by one of those major organizations such as ACA, NIC, or someone like that. Education. Sometimes you don't need a whole lot of evidence to know that it's the right way to go. Education is an evidence-based program in and of itself. The largest one that we provide at the Department of Correction is the General Education Diploma. Each adult inmate is administered the test of adult basic education. Based upon the results of that test, we're able to determine the learning level of that individual. They're then placed into GED preparation classes. And you can see from the data, we put through about 1,000 inmates a year right now to those courses, and we have a pass rate of about 65%, which is pretty good. We also don't allow it to be disrupted. If an inmate is in a GED course, what we want is for them to successfully complete that course. So if they're moving into one of our halfway houses or our residential centers, the information of where they are in their education process moves right along with them now, whether they're moving from one DOC institution to another or from DOC to one of our halfway houses. That same information is there and the continuum goes on. The reason for that, when you look at the success rate of GED programs. What we find out is that after a 3-year period, an inmate that has received his GED has a recidivism rate of roughly 50%. Not terribly good, but better than the general average. An inmate that does not have his GED is recidivating at the rate of some 65%. So when you turn that into numbers, that's actually a big savings. If you're extending the length of time that an inmate recidivates, or if you're reducing the rate of recidivism, either one of those actually saves the taxpayer money. Again, one of our research directors, Dr. Zagober, is one of the instructors here at Rutgers, and she does a lot of work with us on this on a regular basis. The community-based programs, by contract, they are required to use evidence-based programming. So they also are using evidence-based programming. It's important to understand what criteria an inmate has to achieve before he goes to one of our halfway houses. Again, there's the belief that inmates are just randomly put into halfway houses and put back out. Really could not be further from the truth. Any inmate to be eligible for consideration for a halfway house has to have 2 years to their parole eligibility date. They have to have a full minimum classification, which is the lowest security classification that an inmate can achieve. They have to have a good behavioral record. They have to have a medical and a psychological evaluation. And they cannot have any exclusionary charges on their record, such as rape or arson. If they meet all of those criteria, then they are eligible to move toward our assessment centers. There, they will spend some 3 months in the assessment center going through, again, evidence-based programming, but to determine which programming is right for that inmate in the community. Which halfway house is the right halfway house for that inmate to be in? Is it an education-centered location that you want that inmate, or is it a work release type program? The other thing to keep in mind is that when an inmate is in the community, he's still a DOC inmate. They're called residents at that point, but legally you're still a DOC inmate. If an inmate chooses to walk away from that halfway house on the way to his job employment, legally that's an escape. That inmate will add an additional 3 to 5 years to his sentence. He will be brought back into a secure facility, and his classification will be raised again. What that does for the community is it says this person is not ready to succeed. That person is given the opportunity throughout the continuum to determine I'm going to succeed or I'm going to fail. So once they're in a non-secure DOC facility in the community, be it a residential community center or a halfway house, it's less secure. You're not dealing with officers anymore. Now you're dealing with counselors. You're being given the opportunity to walk out to the community, but there are also very strong strings attached to that in that there are standard roll calls. There are the same regulations. So at each step of the continuum, there is a little bit more liberty being given until you finally enter parole, which is about the most liberty that you're going to be given in the criminal justice system. And at any point in that process, if you choose to fail, you'll come back to a secure facility with a higher classification. Again, in conclusion, we get to what works for reentry. And we believe that we're using evidence-based programs. We know we're using evidence-based programs, but we believe that we're using the right mix. But we don't have the evidence yet to show that. And our data Mart, which we're working on very closely with our sister agencies, is what our next tool will be. It's going to be more than just a DOC effort. Again, it requires the community, it requires academicians, it requires parole. So with that, once that's implemented, we will be able to say, for this type of inmate, this probably is the best curriculum and the best parole contract for that inmate to have. Thank you.